Suspect now being chased towards West Dulwich. India 98.
Lima 4, will assist Lima 4. Yeah, MP, Lima 4, Lima 4, over.
You call sign again, MP, over.
Lima 4, over.
354. No, unit. No, Lima unit. Police unit 145.
They are the one that create all the violence and the crime. It's created by the police and from the police.
Thank you. Calm down.
Two policemen came along in the car and they said, have you seen two coons running this way?
Because if they had approached these boys differently, they approached them like wild wolves.
This feeling is still there with the police, to a great extent, that it is always coloured kids that do any muggings, that do any vandalism, that do anything else.
The blacks anyway always seems to get all the hassle. I know most of the black kids anyway, they resent the police.
You didn't say it?
No, all I saw was his face and I couldn't describe
Short
it.
hair? Long hair?
Well, an afro.
Afro style?
So,
All bobbleed up?
It's a very tense relationship at the present time. It's been deteriorating for a number of years for a variety of reasons, but over the last few years, the Special Patrol Group activity in the area and also the application of the sus laws, especially against young blacks, has caused enormous difficulties.
In the past few years, many people in London have warned of an increasingly hostile relationship between the police and the black and Asian communities. The police are as worried about this as anybody else. So much so that they recently commissioned a major piece of research into the problem from an independent academic. Today, in the first of a two-part report on relations between the police and the black community, Skin goes to Lambeth to examine police strategy and to assess the effect it is having. Lambeth is a typical inner-city area with a range of social problems that include large-scale unemployment, poor housing and a high level of crime. In the 1970s, crime rose in Lambeth, but the biggest problem was the growth of street crime, the offences of theft from the person, violent theft and robbery. In the last 8 years, these increased fourfold and last year totalled 2,700. These crimes often involve the theft of bags or purses from women. Thieves operate surreptitiously on the Brixton Road, or more violently in quiet, badly lit residential areas like new housing estates. It's a category of crime that causes great concern in the borough, especially among the large number of elderly people. Len Adams has been the police commander in Ale District for the last 2 years.
Certainly there's been a substantial increase this year. Last year's street crime, if we're talking specifically on robbery and violent theft, ranged at just over 1,200. Up to November of 79, we don't have the up-to-date figures for December yet. Up to November of 79, that figure had reached 1,500. Now that's working out at something like 3 to 5 robberies or violent thefts a day.
To combat street crime, a special robbery squad was set up in El District in 1972, and it now has 36 plainclothes officers. They and Commander Adams share the belief that young blacks are heavily involved in this kind of crime.
All I will say is this, that from the descriptions given by the victims of the crimes that are reported to us, and I'm now talking only about the borough of Lambeth, the El District, then yes, there is a disproportionate involvement of black youth in that particular crime. But before anybody raises a howl of protest, what I must say is this, that in my experience, and from the such figures we have, there is no disproportionate involvement of black youth in crime overall. It is only this particular type of crime that I'm talking about.
In the mid-70s, the Metropolitan Police caused controversy by releasing statistics about street crime to the Select Committee on Race Relations and Immigration. These figures for arrests and victims' identification suggested that blacks were responsible for most of the reported street crimes in Lambeth. This police report was criticised by many as being statistically inadequate. However, a recent Home Office study of race crime and arrests concluded, finally, it has been found that while victims' reports and arrest rates point to the conclusion that blacks are excessively involved in street crime, the data also suggest that blacks are more liable to be picked up by the police, particularly suspected person and other violent theft arrests. Skin has not set out to make further efforts to discover if blacks are disproportionately involved in street crime, and if so, why. We have examined how the police in Lambeth have tackled the rise in street crime and how that has affected the black community. Detective Inspector Bernie Mullett is head of L District's robbery squad, which has the task of arresting the rise in street crimes. They're notoriously difficult crimes to tackle. They're unplanned and over so quickly that sophisticated aids to detection are of little use. Detectives are forced back to basics, like using descriptions of attackers.
In the vast majority, unfortunately, the description isn't always of any help to us, because one appreciates, as I say, that the victim in the majority are women, in the majority are white elderly women who are obviously not waiting to be attacked, and these attacks last literally seconds, and of course she's invariably got her eyes closed when someone is snatching her handbag, and she can't always particularly identify the person concerned.
In addition, the police can't rely on much information about these crimes from the black community.
Information from the public isn't always as good as we would like. For sure, there is these people, and one would think by the records that we've had of arresting these people, they do live in this area quite obviously, and they do take this property somewhere. They do it for a reason, and that's for monetary reward, and their age groups are youngsters in the main, and they must be seen by their close relations and their parents to be having money which they haven't got from a legitimate source. So what one would hope to have had more information, feedback from relations and friends of these people, but we don't.
With little help from standard police techniques, detectives feel they must rely on one basic method.
Well, they're opportunist crimes. In other words, these people go out looking for an opportunity to snatch a handbag, to knock somebody over, to take a handbag, or indeed to rush into a shop and take the till or something of that nature. And therefore, there is no real pattern. And the only way, in my view, that you can prevent that crime is by preventative patrolling.
Either 2 or more officers go to the areas where this type of crime is prevalent. And of course, when they reach the area, they're looking for any person whose actions are suspicious. If you see a person, say, going into a bus queue and then coming away from the bus, if there was ample opportunity for him to get onto that bus, you'll keep that lad or youth under observation and see what his next movements might be. It depends on the suspect from that moment on, exactly what happens. It might be quite innocent, then again, his intention might be to steal. When you're following someone, a lot of these offences happen when there's no other person about excepting the assailant and the victim. And of course, if there is someone about, and they can see someone about, of course they do not commit the offence.
The police hope that by this kind of patrolling, officers may actually see an attack and make arrests. If that's not possible, the police presence may deter criminals. But often what patrolling comes down to is SUS, the controversial suspected persons charge, based on the 1824 Vagrancy Act, which allows the police to arrest anyone they suspect is about to commit a crime, like stealing a purse, rather than wait until he has done so. L District has consistently had one of the highest totals of arrests for SUS in London.
Lambeth now has the highest proportion of arrests of blacks using the SUS law than any other district within the metropolitan area. Over 75% of those who are arrested and proceeded against are actually black. And the fact of the matter is that no crime is actually committed. You only need police evidence in court to say that a crime was about to be committed, or the police had its suspicions aroused sufficiently enough to have arrested that person and proceeded on the basis that they were about to commit a crime.
The problem with SUS is that the black community feels it is being used against them. And it is not only the young blacks who feel picked on. The police reliance on SUS has helped to bring about a change of attitude among older blacks.
There has been a change. In the past, the blacks have felt that the police had to be respected, had to be supported, and because of the incidents that have taken place over the past couple of years or so, there has been a withdrawal of that support. A few years ago, it would have been inconceivable for a youngster to go home, for instance, here, to the parents and complain of police action. The parents would not have been able to conceive of police doing anything wrong to a youngster. And it's taken a number of years, really, before parents came to accept that some of the things that were told them by the youngsters about police action could be true.
It's significant that in recent years, many older West Indians have become involved in groups like the Scrap Sus campaign. Jean Bernard started a group called Lambeth Black Parents Against Sus because more and more parents were worried about their sons getting in trouble with the police.
I see the police as a part of society trying to do a job. When I came to Britain, I mean, I didn't dream that police do the things that I am now experienced that police does.
So your attitudes have changed?
Oh yeah, dramatically over the past 2 years.
This group meets regularly to discuss sus and how to fight for the repeal of the law. They asked us not to show their faces.
Because we are ratepayers, right? We are ratepayers and we are taxpayers and we have a right to vote. We have a right to demand that this law be changed. But if black people...
But the demand is that the government change the law. They are using our children as scapegoat. They're using our children as scapegoat. And we're just not going to sit back and take it anymore. Yeah. We have to go out.
Do you accept that the use of the sus charge in this area has damaged relations with the black community?
Yes, but I would qualify that by saying it no doubt that it is one of the problems which affects the relationship between police and the black community, although I will come in straight away and say that I do not accept that the relations between the police and the black community is as bad as people are being led to believe.
Commander Adams believes that despite the consequences of using the sus law, it has to remain a part of police strategy against street crime.
Well, I think it's very important in as much as it's the only preventative legislation we have. It's the only legislation which allows us to take action before the crime is committed. I don't know how much effect that has on the actual crime of robbery and violent theft. I know, of course, from statistics that the sus charge, sus arrests in 79, first 9 months of 1979 in this district, dropped by 39%. And I know that in the same period, robbery and violent theft went up by 25 and something like 50%. I'm not saying that one is a direct result of the other, but it does give one cause for considerable thought.
Although a reduction in sus arrests would be welcomed by the black community, Lambeth police deny that last year's big fall in arrests represented a change of policy. But even at the peak of its use, sus did not solve the crime problem. Faced with this, Commander Adams has adopted another dramatic measure against street crime. Units of the Special Patrol Group have visited Lambeth 3 times in recent years and were used mainly in intensive stop and search operations. Why did the commander bring them in?
I can always use extra policemen in this area. In fact, if I had another 200 men permanently, I should be very pleased.
Does it indicate the failure of other police methods than if you use the SPG?
No. As I said to you earlier on in our interview, my own view about the control of street crime is as many officers in the street as possible. And if you have the opportunity to get more officers to support your own local men, then you should, any commander who really wants to try and cut down crime and protect the public, which is the important thing, will make full use of extra policing. in a way, I suppose, it indicates that our efforts have not been good enough, but I would put that not down to the deficiencies of the ability of my own officers, but simple deficiencies in numbers.
What effects did it have, the particular operation?
Well, on the major operation, which was November, December 78, it reduced robbery and street crime in that period by something like 50% in this area. There is some indication that we didn't stop the people operating because it would look to me as though they went elsewhere. But we reduced the street crime by something like 50%.
So there was a rise in crime in surrounding areas during the time of the SPG?
Certainly in one area there was, yes. And it is possible that we move them elsewhere.
And was the reduction in robberies and violent theft continued after they left?
Well, no, because as soon as you lose the impact of extra policing, it gradually crept back again.
Stockwell Park Estate in Brixton was one of the areas where the SPG operations, especially during the visit in November and December 78, caused protests from the community.
They left behind them really more problems in terms of relations with the community, and particularly the young community, than they solved, really.
What is it about the SPG that causes that kind of tension, do you think?
I think their approach to people. They're very heavy-handed, they're very authoritarian, and instead of getting to know people and recognising some of the problems in a helpful way, and that doesn't mean to say that I don't like the police cracking down on crime, and indeed none of the tenants would argue that the police shouldn't do their job, but there are ways and means of doing a job where you get better results than just sending in a heavy-handed mob, which when they pull out leave the problems for the local officers, and I think that would be the local policeman's view, even if they wouldn't say so.
Many people, especially in the black community, were upset by the SPG activity, but it also threatened a new venture in police-community relations, a liaison committee set up by the police and the Council for Community Relations in Lambeth. The first meeting was held a few days before the SPG arrived, but community representatives like Owen Sylvester were not given advance warning.
Well, we felt quite humiliated because we thought that the whole object of the police community relations exercise was that we should exchange this type of information, and that we at least should be alerted to any new development with regards to policing the area, so that at least the community at large would be prepared for the shock. As a matter of fact, I don't think the community has got over the trauma.
2 days before the arrival of the SPG in Lambeth in 1978, there was the first meeting of the Police Liaison Committee. Now, after the SPG arrived, the community members of that committee were very annoyed that you hadn't informed them of the imminent arrival of the SPG. Looking back on it now, do you think that that was a mistake on your part?
No, not at that time. The liaison committee had then just been formed. This was the first meeting. In fact, it was the 30th of October, the meeting, and the SPG arrived on the 5th of November. No good general ever declares his forces in a prelude to any kind of attack, and this is what we were going to do. We were going to attack street crime. And on a first meeting with a group of people, some of whom I knew well, of course, some who I didn't, the first meeting is not really the time to assess a measure of real trust. And I felt that the element of surprise was the thing I wanted, and therefore the less I said about it, the better. And in fact, had I said anything about it, the reaction, I'm sure, would have not been any different.
But as it was, the way it was left, with the community leaders suddenly finding out about the SPG from their own community, I mean, that surely had the effect of undermining the committee from the start.
I don't think so, no. Certainly, they felt that I had been underhand. It wasn't intended that way. As I said, one I have experience of police liaison committees before. This isn't a new one to me. And you build up a very good rapport, and you can say things off the record, for example, because you know that that won't be used against you or to your disadvantage. This was a first meeting of a committee. Many of those people I knew, and certainly as individuals, there's not a question of me mistrusting people as individuals, but as a committee, one treads carefully when it's a new meeting.
Soon afterwards, there was another incident which signalled the end of the short-lived committee. This involved 3 officers of the Council for Community Relations in Lambeth, who were taken to Brixton Police Station and kept there for some hours before being released. They are now suing the police for wrongful arrest. As a result, the CCRL withdrew from the liaison committee and expelled the police representative from its executive committee. This incident had a number of serious political consequences for Lambeth Police. Many prominent individuals and organisations, including Labour MP John Tilley, protested about policing methods, especially the use of SUS and the SPG, arguing that they had had a disastrous effect on community relations. Another development was that Lambeth Council set up an inquiry into police community relations. It's been gathering the views of local people and will report later this year. The end result was that the police became increasingly isolated.
I think that the sort of the use of outside police forces, such as the SPG, the use of offences like SUS, while they may catch a few criminals or potential criminals, actually alienate the rest of the group of youngsters, and in fact may make many of them think there's no. They might as well go in for crime because they're going to get picked up whether they do or not. So that I think some of those methods are counterproductive, and I think the police are increasingly realising that.
The SPG have no sense of belonging to the area, have no knowledge of local communities and their networks, and operate in such a way that it has been described as almost a paramilitary way of operating, that they can actually cause damage, and have in fact caused damage, to relationships which have been built up very carefully over a longer period of time.
If you put more policemen on the street, more people, and I agree, some of them innocent people, are going to be stopped and asked what they're doing. And there is always the risk that those people will be offended. Most reasonable people, provided they get a reasonable approach from the police officer, will accept the reasons for being stopped. But I really cannot see that to honestly try and do the job which I am paid for, which is to keep the Queen's peace in the borough of Lambeth, to protect life and property, that if I'm doing that straightforwardly and honestly as I am, that you can say that the majority, the mass of the community, are against me.
Clearly, Lambeth Police do have substantial public support, particularly from those elderly whites who are most worried about crime. But there can be no doubt that they have alienated a large section of the black community by the methods they've used to combat street crime. They have also antagonised many whites who make up the political establishment in Lambeth. At the same time, the controversial tactics they've adopted don't appear to be working. Street crime is still increasing at an alarming rate, and only about a quarter of the crimes that are actually reported to the police are cleared up. And the implications of growing crime in areas where the police don't have community support are alarming.
All the same, you have got, as I keep on coming back to this point, you have got a large representative opinion which says that the strategy is failing, that crime is continuing to rise, there may be short-term reductions, but it's still going up, and that people are being offended and are being alienated by the methods that you choose to use.
Perhaps those people who say that would kindly then try and give me some constructive ideas as to how I prevent it.
Next week's Skin will examine some of the alternative ideas on policing inner city areas that offer some hope of halting rising crime and bringing about good relations between the police and the black community.